Our final main stage speaker today is Dr. Jerry Rosenbaum, who many of you know through his longtime leadership of 2 regional chapters of DAMA, a global association of technical and business professionals dedicated to advancing the concepts and practices of information and data management. Dr. Rosenbaum has more than 40 years of experience in private industry, nonprofit, and government agencies. His work spans multiple industries, including insurance, healthcare, finance, transportation, and manufacturing, as well as government agencies including the United States Department of Defense, Social Security Administration, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, Department of Education, Securities and Exchange Commission, Federal Emergency Management Agency, and Housing and Urban Development. With remarks entitled Big Data, Fire, Ready, Aim, please welcome Dr. Jerry Rosenbaum.
Okay. Is that the first or the second? Okay, when I was thinking about doing this talk, the question is, what's the most interesting topic? Most of you have seen all these tools that the vendors say, if you buy tool X, well, all you have to do is load it, it works, and you get the magic answer. Well, you do get magic answers. The trouble is, only about 83% of the projects fail. And pick your various choices of statistics and who says them. And a return of investment of 55 cents on a dollar is not exactly what you're looking for. And what's the most surprising is 20% of the executives say they were successful. I question what they mean by success sometimes, but that's what they say. Well, the question I ask myself is, how can we improve those odds? This is not the best way to spend your money. There's nothing wrong with having a project that fails. The big question is, if it fails, what do you do next? What do you learn from it? Hopefully you'll learn something from it and enable you to move ahead and eventually succeed. In fact, most of the people who do inventions, they failed more times than they succeeded, but they did succeed. So we're going to talk about some of the ways of improving the odds. And one of the most important is preparation. If you don't prepare for the project and do all the preparation steps, your chances of success will be a lot lower. Dwight Eisenhower was a U.S. 5-star general, and most of you know he was president of the U.S. He had a little better results on D-Day than General George Custer, who didn't quite prepare for Little Bighorn. So you have to ask the question, where does that help you? What type of preparation do we do? What questions do we ask? Now, I'll go through some of the standard project management things that say do this, do this, do this, but I'm going to spend more time on the data and the issues you deal with the data. And I made a reference to the 7P approach really succeeds. 7P is, the polite version is pretty poor planning produces pretty poor products. There's a slightly less polite version that comes around. Okay, so like all projects, you have to do some upfront planning, make sure things are set up right, that you're ready to go. And that's usually the biggest part of your project. And for those of you who've been through everybody here been through the 5th and 6th grade and write compositions? Remember the who, what, where, when, why, and how? Well, those are the types of questions we have to ask in the context of the project, obviously. Then, once you've done all this preparation, the smallest part of the project is actually doing it on many of these big data projects. And then the last question is, then what? What are all these post-project activities you should think of? Because you're not just doing one big data project. Maybe there's a second. Maybe you should move in a different direction. Maybe you should pursue the current data further. There's lots of questions you can ask. First things first, you need a use case. What are we doing? Are you going to start big, a nice big bang? Well, the big bang is usually called a nuclear event, and it doesn't work. So you need something that's a reasonable size, and the famous scope creep problem is always there. You have to say, I'm only doing this much. If you want me to do more, no problem, we'll finish doing this, and then we'll do some more. Those are the issues you have to deal with on any project. And with big data, they're there in spades. You always have to keep in mind that somebody wants, oh, there's a little bit more data, why don't you do this? Now, let's do this first. Next question is, how do you know when you're done? The project is not meant to last forever. You have to have some definition of, well, when I get these results, I'll either say I'm done or it didn't work, let's try something else. And if you do get results, are they any good? What was the business purpose or the agency's purpose for doing this project? Well, let me take a simple example. This was done, we can identify the agency, it's a good result. It was Social Security Administration. They wanted to do a big data project. So one of their contractors, we'll leave them nameless for the moment, but they did good work. They looked into the question of what could we do? They decided that paying dead people for Social Security is not the ideal thing. Okay. But then again, remember, dead people do vote. It's called the cemetery vote. But we'll ignore that one. Okay. Well, how do you find dead people? Well, they said, okay, look at the newspaper every day. There's an obituary column. So what they did is they made a project to go through they just took a couple of metropolitan areas, not the entire US, and they analyzed the obituaries. Well, how do you find obituaries? Well, you get an electronic copy of the newspaper, and you look for the word obituary. That's pretty easy. And then you have to scan the text and say, well, which person died and which were the living relatives? They did that. And to everybody's surprise, they found names of people still collecting Social Security, because there's a list of people collecting Social Security, and a list of dead people. There were matches. Okay, next what? Well, they told this to Social Security, but remember, that doesn't mean that the person in the Social Security list was the same as the person who died. So they had to do some further checks. But it shows that you can take a small project, keep the scope limited, and actually get success. And of course, they can go further. The only thing I can add to it is they never went further that I know about. So I guess we're still paying people who are not quite here to get Social Security. But don't worry, it's only your tax dollars. Okay, project team. Who do you need on the project team? Well, you need some programmers usually, but wait a moment, what type of programmers? What type of data are you dealing with? Is it tabular data? Is it what we call unstructured data, which is a terrible term? How many of you have ever seen unstructured data? I haven't. Everything I see has that they call unstructured, has sentences, paragraphs, nouns, verbs, adjectives. So there really is a structure. The term came up back in the, when was it? In the late 1970s, when they were first putting out relational databases, they did not want to handle textual data. So one of the companies, we'll leave them nameless in this case, said, well, wait a moment, that's unstructured, we can't deal with it. That's how the name came. It's stuck. We'll live with it. So you need people who can manage that if that's what you're dealing with. Okay, how about a statistician? Well, you need an applied statistician, maybe a data scientist. Definitely not somebody who's just a BI jockey, because anybody can run a correlation. And by the way, anybody here concerned about global warming? Okay, we should be concerned about it, but remember, the increase in ocean temperature correlates very well with the sightings of UFOs. So therefore, we now know how to solve the problem. Well, no, you have to know what you're looking at. Does the data make sense? People who do that for a living are data scientists, applied statisticians, and actuaries. You need one of those on your team. just to make sure what you're gathering makes sense. And always a business person, so you can ask the question, are we trying to do something that's reasonable, or is this an unreasonable thing that we're looking for? Okay, tools. Lots of people will talk about that. I'm going to leave that topic, say, get some tool, don't build it yourself. Okay, the bigger questions are the data. What data are you using? Is it your internal data or external data? What's its structure? How is it organized? Are we getting this data one time, or are we going to keep getting downloads of it on a periodic basis? Do I have to back it up, or can I, if it gets messed up, just go get another copy? What makes the most sense there? By the way, are there any legal complications? Make sure you understand all the legalities of the data you just got your hands on. How about personal identifying information? Be very careful about that, and confidential information. The better result is get rid of it fast. If you get it, take it out of your, just erase it, that piece of it if you can. Okay, where are you going to store it? Your hardware vendor will be love to sell you more data storage. You know, what's wrong with buying another 100 petabytes of data? Your vendor will be happy about that. Your CFO may hate you, but you know, you have to worry about that and ask the question, what is the appropriate amount of data that we need? And by the way, do I have to keep it all in high-speed storage? Or can I put some of it in backup archival storage, which is a lot cheaper, and bring it forward when I need it? What makes the most sense? You have to keep asking these questions. And most of what I'm going to talk about today are questions. Oh, by the way, did you set up your own internal technology like a Hadoop to work with the data? If this is your first time, be very careful with Hadoop. It's a distributed database, but you have to understand how it works together. Now, we often talk about you have data, you have metadata. Do you really understand what the data is that you're looking at? Do you have good definitions for it? Let me tell you a story that was a success, actually. Well, it's a combination of a success and a failure. It's mostly in the area of metadata. It took place at a health insurance company. The health insurers get their actuaries to look at the data for claims on a regular basis. Well, they were looking at data for 1 quarter, and they noticed something very strange. There was a large number of increase in claims for hemorrhoids. Okay, wait a moment. That's not the most common thing happening. What's going on? Why did we suddenly get increases in hemorrhoids? So they didn't just say, oh, here it is. Let's approve some new payments for this, or rules and regulations for who can get it. They decided to say, why is that there? Well, that's why you want the actuaries. Well, the actuaries kept looking, and they discovered, wait a moment. All the hemorrhoid cases only came through one office in the country, not all the offices. That's even stranger. I guess there was a contagious disease in that area of the country or something. Okay, let's keep looking further. Well, they were talking to the people in the office, and they finally got to a group that says, oh, we didn't know anybody was using that data field. Famous last words. We put the indication hemorrhoids there to indicate that it was a difficult patient to deal with. Okay. What did the data really mean? If you first looked at it, you didn't understand it. But if you look further, they got to understand exactly why that was there. Well, make sure. Now, I thought I knew who told me that story. I told it to him, and he said, no, I never told you that story. But it's a good story anyhow. So whenever you're dealing with questions of metadata and understanding your data and quality, remind people of the hemorrhoid story. Nobody forgets it after they heard it. Oh, and even more fun, suppose you're getting your big data from 2 or 3 sources. Do they all agree on the same meanings? I wish you the best on that because strange things happen. And what that says is, as part of the project planning, you have to actually look at the data and make sure it makes sense. Does it really what you expect it to be? Or is it something else? Always, before you do the final analyses, look at the actual data and make sure it behaves well. Oh, and by the way, make sure you know the units of measure. Are we in metric? Are we in English measure? Remember the famous Mars lander? One company measured meters, the other measured feet, and they had what's called an unplanned encounter with the terrain. The lander crashed because one of the vendors used a different measure system. So always look at these are simple things, but they're the things that can get you into trouble. Data governance. I think a lot was said about that already, but make sure you have policies in place about how this data is governed. How is it used? Are we putting it out there and then a whole bunch of other people are going to go grab this data and have fun with it? Are they allowed to? Do we really know what's happening? Does the governance rule say that we really must have metadata in place? These are the questions you have to be asking. And ETL is another piece you have to use. You have to take this data, move it around if you have more than one source. Do you know what that tool is doing to you? If you have dates of birth, and then the tool leaves out the date, so you just have month and year, you've changed the data. Is that good or bad? It may be either. Maybe you only need the year. What do you need? What was essential? What was there originally? What was lost? Do all sources have everything in detail? The same level of detail? These are questions that have to keep coming up. And as one of my friends kept phrasing it, it's all in the data, stupid. Look at the data. Make sure you know what you're going after. And one of the AI things, we talk about recognizing pictures, and they use machine learning to learn what pictures look like. Reminded me of a story of my grandson when he was about 3 years old. We were passing a friend's house. They had 2 large dogs, and the dogs had very bushy manes around their face. I forgot what type, some type of terrier, I forgot the name of it. My grandson was looking at it. They were sort of a reddish-orange dog, and he looks at it, and he's looking, saying, lion. He didn't quite learn yet. But you have to make sure that it's there. Data quality. We can go on forever about this topic. I'll keep it relatively short, but make sure that you really have quality data. Is the data accurate? Is it valid? How do we know? These are questions we have to ask. And beware data cleansing. When you're dealing with a project using other people's data, if you're cleansing it, you may not know what you're really doing. You may be just changing things that are strange. So watch out for that. A quick story on that is I was invited by some friends to help them on a project to move, well, this is about 10 years ago. It was only 10 terabytes of data. Today that's small. Back then that was large. It was automobile and home claims for insurance. Well, our team recommended just wrap up the data nicely in some nice way to tell the actuaries what to do. Doesn't matter what you use. As long as you tell the actuaries, they'll be happy. Don't change the data. Well, we lost the bid to a contractor who says, we'll change the data, we'll fix it, we'll get all rules for cleaning up your data. Everything will be nice and pristine. Well, it took them 3 years, and they did a production run. And there was only 6 million exceptions. No joke, 6 million. They didn't quite succeed. But they also missed the fact that if they would have cleaned it up, they would have had to report back to all 50 states that there was a change in their regulatory reports. Understand the impact of changing your data. No CEO wants to ever report back 10 years worth of reporting to the states. Okay. Talking the data should be suitable. A bit more. Are your people trained? New tools, new things. It takes time to train people. The way a consulting company cuts the time short is that their people are already trained. If your people are not already trained, you must do that. And of course, you need budgets. You can't do something for free. Oh, you can, but you're crazy. You have to sell the project. That takes time. You have to deploy all the pieces. And after you deploy them, you have to test them to make sure they're really there, they really work. Okay, as we're running quickly on time and automate what's reasonable, then you have to do the work. After you've gotten to all this trouble fixing your data and changing it and everything else, you're now ready to do your analysis. Well, wait a moment, did you have a hypothesis? If you don't, you're just searching for strange things. You can find out that the raise in water temperature globally correlates very nicely with UFOs. Was that what you want to know? So these are things you have to keep asking. And how are you visualizing the results? People like pictures. Make sure you have things that are pretty pictures. Otherwise, they won't pay attention to you. And what is the return on investment? For real, not invented. Okay, and next steps. Make sure you know what can be done next. Is this project a dead end? Or are there, remember all those scope creeps? Maybe we should do some of those. Maybe we should be moving in a totally different direction. Lessons learned, it'd be nice if I spelled it right. It's a correct word, but not that meaning. Oh well, spell check doesn't get everything. That's one of the things you learn. So, as we learn new lessons, we have to move them into the future. And we'll say thank you and ask questions.
So once more, if you have questions for Dr. Rosenbaum, please come up to the microphone, introduce yourself, and ask your brief question.
And I'll try to give you an answer.
Right, thank you. I'm Kirk Bourne from Booz Allen Hamilton. I wanted to ask a question about the title of your talk, because it was so intriguing. Aim ready, or was it fire ready aim? And I'm sure there's a story there.
Well, when you have a duel, they tell you to you're ready, you aim, and then you fire. If you choose the alternative and fire before you're too ready, you usually shoot yourself in the foot. And over 80% of these projects have shot themselves in the foot. And I sort of stole it halfway from another consulting company with a picture of a guy with a big shoe and a hole in the foot. For the same idea. I don't remember what the ordering he did was, but it's the same idea. So the message is, first get yourself ready, then aim for what you're doing, and then pull the trigger.
Next question.
More questions?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Hello. This is a question for how can I really apply? And so when we're talking about the project team, as a public administrator who has to take the results of the project and implement them or apply them on the ground, because at the end of the day, it's the beneficiaries or the end users. It's only as good as it's used. Can you connect the dot for me in terms of, in the phase of project and gathering the information and analyzing the big data, is it too soon to include an end user or a beneficiary perspective in the project team itself?
Thank you. That makes it easier. I do have a loud voice, but not that loud. In any case, the answer is I always want end users The reason is if you're doing a project, it's meant to be used by somebody. And if it's going to be used by somebody, you want to put the results in a way that is actually useful to that person. If you just talk to managers, you get one perspective. If you talk to the people who actually use it, you may get a very different perspective and find out maybe there's a different question I should be answering. I'm asking question A, but maybe question A prime is a much better question. So the answer I always give is get hold of the end user whenever you can. The problem you may have, and I've had this problem happen to me, is I once went to the end users, and about 2 weeks later, a number of senior managers came after my tail telling me I was a very bad boy and I should never talk to them, and forbid them to talk to me. So we lost a lot of valuable information. So you have to, yes, you should get it, but be careful.
Any other questions? Final question.
Dr. Jerry, this is Lanesh. By the way, very interesting presentation. Thank you. We'll never forget hemorrhoids and AIDS. I don't know, AIDS you mentioned in passing, which is all in data stupid. I'll never forget that. Thank you. My question to you is, in the projects that you've planned, worked on, where have you estimated or planned for doing the domain, or getting the domain knowledge, right, or doing the domain study? Do you estimate it as part of your project planning and do it right within the project, or do you do outside of your project?
The important thing is to do it. Period. Now the question is when. And there's no good answer to that. In some places, if you can get your hands on the domain experts earlier, talk to them and use it as part of the planning and part of the learning of what's happening. Many years ago, I was at a little company called Boeing. And my job was, I was managing the CAD/CAM software, which is so the entire design of, in this case, helicopters, and the building of the helicopters was dependent on the software that my team was responsible for. Well, we had to be careful what we were doing. And it turned out I was the first manager to send every one of my people to go visit the factory. They got a walking tour of the entire factory. Therefore, they saw every single step of first designing the helicopter, that was the engineering part of the factory, and then the building part of the factory, how they actually build it. Well, that made a huge difference. We were very effective. We actually solved real problems most of the time. I said most of the time, because occasionally we couldn't get the right answers. So I would try to get it beforehand whenever you can. If not, try to make it part of the project. Because if it's not part of the project, you may be solving an interesting problem that's totally irrelevant to the business. Which is nice that you solved the problem, but who cares? So get it is the most important thing. And sometimes you have to do it quietly. And sometimes when doing it, you may get in trouble, but you have to decide what's the important thing. I've done it very well and gotten success. I've done it well and gotten in trouble. Nothing much you can do about that except smile and move on. Anything else? Other questions? That was the last question.